All right, welcome everyone. We're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we're here, of course, for podcast number 14.
Now, this one's Underdog Stories.
Underdog stories in particular. And, you know, those characters that start from the bottom and they go places. Yep. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go very far, but it's the idea that their circumstances that have been put around them, not necessarily by even their own choice at all,
but stacked against
them. The odds stacked against them. They somehow overcome adversity.
Now, before we get too in detail onto that, we do have some announcements. Everything's pretty much the same as usual for this week. Right. So, Monday is.
Well, you should have just watched Death Parade.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, Jacob's a little bit out of it right now. But then we have Hunter x Hunter on Tuesday, Psychopaths Wednesday, Hunter x Hunter Thursday, My Hero Academia Friday, Ruby on Saturday, JoJo's following same day as well, and then of course Hype Q on Sundays.
And then it all again, starts
resets.
Over again.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm covering for you, buddy. Also, we have a shout out for particular patron at our VIP level, Cyrus. You're an awesome supporter, and thank you so much for everything that you've contributed with on the Discord, and also for your financial support. We appreciate it a lot.
Super duper appreciate it.
Super grateful, dude.
Yeah.
All right, so with this whole storytelling aspect of underdog characters, there comes to mind this idea of facing down this giant wall in front of you. Kind of this idea of kind of like Eren Yeager almost looking at the walls around them being like, these walls standing are against me and stuff. And that's a very integral part of storytelling in general, is the idea that your primary character ends up somewhat being relatable because of the struggles that they're going with. But that doesn't necessarily make them an underdog character.
Exactly. And that's an important thing to focus on for underdog stories, because the main reason we like them so much is because, one, they're a lot more relatable. Mm-hmm. If there's some demigod, it's a bit harder to get behind that to start off with. But then it's also the idea that anything that they accomplish with the odds stacked against them will be way more important and way more rewarding than if some demigod had done the same thing.
Right.
Sam beat Shelob, and it was epic.
Yes.
If Gandalf or Aragorn had gone to fight Shelob, wouldn't have been all that interesting.
It wouldn't have been as interesting. It's the idea that you can have, a lot of things that are your choices that bring you into a powerful position in the story for this character, but the environmental odds basically being stacked against them makes those choices, like you're saying, more rewarding. Yeah. But it also shows ways that this character can grow.
Yes.
And go to a place to where they were, I would say, more. They just grow. They change into that position.
Yeah, one of the really cool things that can happen in underdog stories is that point when the underdog looks back and says, like, wow, where I'm at now compared to where I started is just night and day.
It's night and day. Also, one of the other things that's really important is the idea that struggle is what truly connects us all as human beings. And when you have an underdog character, that struggle is going to be something that other people have struggled with the exact same thing.
Right.
And it's not necessarily just something like fear or, like Zuko's case, an abusive dad or something like that. It's the idea that you could be struggling with something that's so unique that there's a specific group of people that are going to know exactly what that's like. But everyone else is just going to be like, whoa, I'm so blessed that I don't have to deal with that in particular.
And it's great because even if, there's the niche case, where it's specifically okay, this kind of underdog, and then anyone that has gone through that same thing, they will be completely relating to the character.
Exactly.
But even if they haven't, everyone understands the idea of struggle, because we've all had to struggle at different things in our lives, depending on what our circumstances are. Mm-hmm. And that's something that just transcends the idea of a story.
Right.
So that's the thing to focus on. Don't have an underdog story where the underdog doesn't struggle.
Right. One of the things that I've noticed in a lot of stories in particular like this is these characters who are underdogs can get a lot of flack for having relatable human emotions. There's an aspect of that in My Hero Academia where Deku as a character bursts into tears quite often because he's a very overly emotional character, but it's also the fact that he's not as confident in himself.
Right.
And he's not prepared to act with confidence.
Exactly.
In this environment that he's been transitioned into.
Because he is a true underdog.
Because he's a true underdog.
Yeah.
I would say that there are a lot of characters who, like we brought up Zuko, for instance, who have an underdog set of environmental factors, whereas they came from a place of privilege or a place of position where they weren't necessarily the underdog.
Right.
But that loss of that position, or like a falling from grace, so to speak, makes them the underdog, and it's a story of them regaining what they lost.
Yep. Well said.
Yeah.
One of the things that happens a lot of the time with underdog stories is that they'll start out as an underdog, but they'll do that as a way to basically get you hooked on the character.
Right.
Deku is a great example of that. Not that this is a bad thing. One of the ways that I would say is less of a good example of it is Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan.
Yes.
He starts out as a complete underdog. And like when I first watched Attack on Titan, I was so on board with this. I was like, yes, I love this character.
Right.
And then suddenly he's a Titan and he can just destroy like Titans in by the dozens, and and that sense of struggle was lost. He still had the passion, even if it turned into just kind of rage.
Right. In that case, Armin became the underdog.
Yeah.
At that point,
yeah.
It was
exactly.
transitioned because I'd say they were both underdogs originally, but the idea that he was the main character gave us the idea that, of course he's the underdog.
Right.
But once things transitioned, that was when I actually also grabbed onto Armin in particular. I was like, okay, you're my favorite character. But also Hanji, I'd say, slightly edges out Armin in some specific ways.
Even though she's not 100.
But back on topic, we're going to talk about two underdog characters in particular in stories that really revolve solely
around the underdog
idea.
Aspect, yeah.
But the funny thing is that they don't necessarily revolve around this specific character within the story.
Right.
And this is where underdog stories have a little bit of an advantage on other stories, in that the underdog component brings that relatable, emotional, visceral, sometimes even connection. Yeah, exactly. To not just the character, but the story as a whole.
Yes.
And what that does is essentially it kind of cheeses out the audience's disconnect with some of the other characters who are not even at all related to the underdog portion of the story.
Because since you're so attached to the underdog character, you will naturally be attached to the struggles and the things that they have to go through. So the world, the plot, the whatever, if the underdog is a part of it, you are a part of it.
And it also requires good execution on the part of the underdog dynamic, because if it's done in a contrived or very kind of hackneyed, kind of rushed, put together kind of fashion, it falls apart very quickly. And you can tell when stories do this, because one of the easiest things to kind of notice it is that everyone reminds the character of their underdog nature.
Right.
And it's kind of a thing to...
It's telling, not showing.
Yeah, it's telling, not showing. It's the idea of you're trying to speak to the audience and remind them, this is how they're an underdog. This is how they're an underdog. Instead of having them go through a very slow journey, you just remind people that they're on a journey.
Exactly.
Which is not realistic. It's not connected.
Well, because the main way you connect people to characters, whether it's underdog or something else, is through the emotions, even if it's a lack thereof.
Right.
But for an underdog story, the emotions should be especially strong and especially easy to be felt.
Right.
So if they aren't there, then it's kind of like, is this person really an underdog? But,
so let's kick it off with mine. This is coming no surprise to anyone here who is a big anime fan. One of the greatest underdog stories in anime. Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. Wow. Simone as an underdog character.
Yep.
I'm going to go vaguely into spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen the show, be very aware of the fact that I'm going to I'm not explicitly going to spoil things, but I'm going to talk about the general picture of his arc, which, knowing that this arc will happen is kind of a spoiler in and of itself. Yeah,
and so it'd probably be best to just skip ahead to a future part. We'll put a timestamp in there for so you can avoid the spoiler, because this is
in a pinned comment or in the description.
Yeah, exactly, because of all anime spoilers, this is the worst.
Well, right. I'm not going to go into that.
Okay.
So let me talk. The thing about Simone as a character is it's very obvious the fact that they're making him to be a sympathetic underdog character, because he's contrasted by his brother Kamina, who is basically the voice of passionate encouragement and inspiration to this younger brother character who has no confidence, extreme insecurities, lots of fear, very timid, and honestly not a lot going for him in terms of his why, his purpose as a character. So when Kamina gets put onto the scene as the main kind of driving force of the plot and stuff, he says, our circumstances, who cares about them? Let's drive to the surface and, set ourselves free. And Simone is carrying the little spark of hope within not within himself, but also without himself, to make this possible. But it's shown in a way, if you think about this story in a metaphorical kind of big picture kind of sense, Simone is the only one that could have made that happen. If you think about it.
Yeah.
Kamina needed to encourage him in order to actually push him to make these choices and such. So the story has a massive arc for Simone, going from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, covering a massive span of character struggles and choices and difficult moments that shape Simone as a character to where he is at the end of the show. To where you almost, in a way, have Kamina kind of get pushed to the side a little bit.
Right.
If you watch the show, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But the idea that Simone's character goes through these specific things in kind of the point where the arc of the show transitions to the second half in particular, you can see where his humble beginnings kind of bleed through into the rest of the story. And that he doesn't completely lose that and become a completely different person. And he doesn't become Kamina. But there are moments, and they're so good, and every Gurren Lagann fan knows these moments in particular, where he realizes that he's not meant to become the next Kamina. Or, he's meant to be like Kamina. He's meant to take the positives and the strengths of all these people that have come around beside him and add his own energy, so to speak. And spiral it all together into something beautiful that will shake the cosmos forever.
And dare we say, pierce the heavens.
Pierce the heavens and all that good stuff. Yep. So, I wanted to be vague with that in particular because it's such a great story that I couldn't bear to see someone get spoiled by it. But
so good.
As far as having a character go through the makeover kind of underdog story, where you see them in one picture here in the beginning and you see them in one picture here at the end, and it's night and day. You can't recognize them.
Absolutely can't.
You cannot. In fact, in some ways, you will see aspects or semblances of every other character that's the side characters, the Kaminas, all the other characters as well, being kind of represented in Simone.
Sort of spun into him.
Yeah. The idea that a true underdog kind of savior character, which she kind of does end up being, is the representative of humanity as a whole. And I don't want to get too philosophical or ridiculous or anything here, but the idea that Simone's character represents something beyond himself is an important aspect of this underdog story in particular. I don't think it's necessary for any underdog story in particular, but the idea that when you see the choices that he makes and the fact that his character takes these steps not for his own goals even, the idea that there's points when, grit those teeth. That he's making these choices to specifically be the person that stands up for those that couldn't stand up for themselves. He ends up being the type of person that would have saved himself at a younger age.
Exactly.
And us seeing these moments in particular, in like quite a few of them, really make us recognize how far he's come without kind of having to rely on that rule of cool big moment near the end or something where we're like, now we see how far he's come, and there was no telling of it all the way up until then. It's a sequence of small little decisions and changes and evolutions of his character that bring the true underdog story out of Gurren Lagann.
Nice.
Other than that, you need to watch it if you haven't.
Really
it's an experience.
It is.
It might not change your life necessarily, but it will change the way that you view storytelling. It will change the way that you view underdog stories in particular. And you'll probably feel good after watching it.
Probably.
Just probably. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, that's basically all I have to say without going into the super spoiler territory.
Exactly, because we don't want that.
Right.
So mine is A Silent Voice.
Yes.
Now, I had a bit of trouble coming up with one for this, and I thought of Silent Voice, and then Caleb pointed something out to me. But A Silent Voice actually has two underdogs.
Mm-hmm.
Both the main characters are underdogs, and
in completely
different ways.
Yeah.
And they and this is one of the things that I would say makes A Silent Voice such a great underdog story.
Yes.
Is because they stay underdogs throughout the entire bit. All from the beginning to end, they're still underdogs. You don't see that often. And when it is seen, it's usually not done well. Because they do overcome their struggles. But they're still underdogs. And it's awesome. I love it. But in this particular case, so I'm going to start talking about Shoyo. Dang it, crap, I can't forgot. The girl. Yeah.
Yes.
So she's deaf. So underdog story right there.
Yep.
At a disadvantage for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And in the first 20 minutes of the movie, you get to see her get bullied viciously by the other kids in her class. And who can't relate to bullying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, come on. Like, even if you haven't been bullied, even if you don't know anyone like in your like immediate circle that has been bullied, just the idea of bullying is fundamentally just makes your heart go out to the person. Mm-hmm. And you know what Silent Voice does? They take that and they make it even better, because the one doing the bullying is the main character. So you want to strangle the little asshole's neck as he's, just being an absolutely terrible 12-year-old. But, he's a 12-year-old, right? But then the tables get turned. And then he's the one getting bullied.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's the underdog. And then they're both underdogs, and it's amazing, and you absolutely need to see it because it is fantastic. It will make you cry. Unless you have a brick for a heart. The first 20 minutes is like the best intro to a story I've ever seen, because you really want to kill this kid, and then you're like, oh crap, I am so excited to see this underdog story be played out.
I was just introduced to it not like a month ago, and one of the things that really stood out to me with the idea of them both being underdogs was that there was a connection that they were actually sharing without necessarily even knowing it, of being kind of put into this mentality of victimization. Well, no, victimization. The idea that they were victimized and they victimized themselves.
Yes.
The idea that the mental health of people that are victimized and also choose to be victimized is a very weighty thing.
Yeah.
And it's something that, in particular, I would say hit harder to me than even the bullying. Because I see bullying as a thing that makes me kind of get my justice meter up. Like I get frustrated at the injustice that happens in the world. But the idea that this is the actual consequences of that creates a different type of internal underdog storyline, where the actual weight of the choices that you made that aren't good choices affects you in your mental health.
Yep.
And that is insanely compelling, and it's very, very heavy stuff.
It is. And okay, here's the last thing I'll say about A Silent Voice. Because they have two underdog main characters, you get to see not just an underdog main character where they're being the underdog and they're struggling against, the deck that's stacked against them.
Right.
But in this, they decide to be underdogs together.
Right.
And it's really sweet. As far as ways to make you root for the actual romance that's happening in a romance story, oftentimes that will be kind of lackluster in romance stories, and it's unfortunate when it happens. But I was so on board with this romance story when even though he was the guy that bullied her. It's like you would not want that to happen, right? But the way they do it is just so good because they are both underdogs. And anyways, so yeah, A Silent Voice. You need to check it out. Voice. It's so good.
It's really good. I would say, just to close in the whole idea of the underdog story, is that there's a difference between having an underdog character and an underdog story.
Yes.
And
well said.
One of the things that both of these stories that we mentioned do, A Silent Voice and Gurren Lagann, is they meld the two perfectly.
Sure.
I would say that most stories will have an underdog character for the sake of having an underdog character,
right, and
without actually melding the story together with
exactly. They'll just be sort of like the token underdog character, like the token tragic death or whatever, you know.
And one of the things that you cannot do is have a character there to get the sympathy and empathy of the viewers without tying it into the story in an integral way.
Yeah.
They don't come exclusively. You can't basically buy it cheaply. You have to change the story and work it around that in some way. One of the things that I'd say something like Avatar: The Last Airbender does, where there are multiple moments where you do not empathize with Zuko.
No.
As his underdog bit goes into play here. But there are other times where they remind you how integrally tied into the story the underdog journey that he goes on is. And you feel quite a bit there. With something like Gurren Lagann and Simone in particular, it's not a static deck that's stacked against him. The deck sometimes gets bigger. The things stacked against him don't just continue to get easier. Sometimes they get harder. Yep. Sometimes a different aspect of the things that are stacked against him changes. And maybe, the character themselves begins to doubt their own ability to overcome the conflict.
Yep.
And these are things that you'd be like, well, yeah, you need to have those in every story. But just because you have them doesn't mean they're executed well.
Right.
And both of these stories, Gurren Lagann and A Silent Voice, do these things that we're talking about.
Very
well.
They
execute them nigh perfectly.
Yep. And by the way, there are a lot of stories like we would like to think that not a lot of stories will that most stories will know to have that kind of struggle where the heroes will in underdog stories doubt themselves and wonder if they're actually doing the right thing because they're in the moment. They don't have the outsider perspective that we have. But a lot of stories don't.
They don't.
A lot do, and a lot of times they just don't execute it well. But a lot of times they don't do it at all.
And it's really unfortunate because you're missing out on, I would say, a necessary evolution of the story to keep it from being static and a little bit just not believable. So so underdog stories are fantastic.
Yep.
If you can execute them well, if you're willing to integrally tie the aspect of the underdog character into the story, thereby making it, at least in some aspect, an underdog story. Not necessarily solely an underdog story like Avatar: The Last Airbender is, for instance, but having that be a key pillar of the story.
Yep.
That's not going to be just propped up there as a prop, but actually a foundation cornerstone of some aspect of the characters. So, that being said, let's jump into Q&A.
There are a lot of really good ones for this one.
There are quite a few, so stick around for some awesome questions in here. First one's from Little Duck, and the question is, how do you handle big betrayals, i.e. characters that were thought to be good, but end up stabbing the protagonist in the back without the betrayal seeming contrived or so obvious that you saw it coming? Well, I think we actually went into Golden Sun
I was going to say.
That is probably one of the best. I mean, spoilers, but
there's multiple twists and
betrayals
and stuff, and they're handled very well.
Right.
So go read that.
Right. I also think Game of Thrones needs a shout out here because the Bolton betrayal. I mean, this came out a long time ago, and most people watched Game of Thrones, so sorry. But the Red Wedding was one of the best betrayals. In a story that you absolutely could have seen coming. But it was not obvious.
Right.
It's the idea that this was a thing that it was a weighted risk. is the idea that, yes, it could happen, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen.
And the fact that it happened to such
ramifications,
like,
yeah.
Because you didn't even really care about the Boltons much, it's like, oh yeah, the Boltons are the Boltons,
Right.
So
okay.
So it didn't feel like as much of a betrayal because they weren't like as close, but because it went so wrong,
so wrong. It was really powerful.
Yeah,
and also it was very shocking and heartbreaking. So I would say, in a story like that, you actually have a little bit of leeway to be brutal in your betrayals and stuff.
Yeah.
But just kind of look at it like that in a way.
All right, Patricia DeGamac. I probably butchered that. I am terribly sorry. We got a few questions here. So, how much thought should one put into creating a title for a story?
Here's the thing. Create the story and then the title.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Don't make the title and then the story. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily what she's saying either.
No, but I'm meaning how much thought is none at all. You make the story. No, I'm serious, Jacob. No, Jacob. But listen to me here. You can give a contrary opinion, but
okay.
Listen to what I'm saying here. When you're creating a title for a story, if you don't already have your story in place, then there's no reason to think about it.
Yes.
The idea that
absolutely.
When you put thought into it, it actually, I'd say,
it
means
starts to come to the forefront.
No, I'm meaning that you actually don't have a story yet. Because if you have a story, the title just makes sense.
Right. Yep.
Like, there's not really much thought you have to put into it. You go, okay, this is my story. Okay, I'm obviously doing one of these 3 titles then, because those are the only ones that fit with the story.
Yeah.
The idea that your story being created forces you into a specific set of titles is my point.
And that is an excellent point. What I would like to say is that you want to make sure that the title properly sets the expectations with the audience for your story, for the kind of story that it is. I heard a story about how there was a story where and this goes into the cover too, but they just had a sword for the cover, and it was actually a medieval erotica. That got people kind of upset.
Okay,
so with this,
remember what the question in here is.
For the
how
title.
How much thought? That is the question.
Oh yeah.
So you're not talking about actually what they should think about. We're trying to figure out how much thought.
There should be a lot.
So you're saying there's a lot.
Yes.
I actually think that it should be almost none, because of the idea that once you are, like, let's think about this practically. If you actually have a story and it's finished, and you have a story that's a sci-fi, family-oriented story about people and mechanized, battle suits, blah, 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 all this stuff, and the way the, names are all incorporated and stuff, you can come up with a whole gamut of sci-fi generic names and stuff that have no connection to your actual story. If you are keeping what type of story this is and some connection to a minor plot element within the story and maybe the theme, you're only going to come up with a few titles anyway.
Right, but you do want to make sure that, your title is unique. You don't want there to be a bunch of different, duplicate copies of it. You want to make sure it communicates what genre it is. That is a really big, important one. And the major themes.
Fallen Angel doesn't communicate the genre it's in.
Exactly, which is why I ended up changing it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So.
Okay, I didn't know that. Cool. Yeah. All right, so next question. Also, how can you write a kudere character good enough that they can't simply be labeled as someone who doesn't have personality? That's a great question. So for the viewers, Jacob, explain what a kudere is.
A kudere is basically in anime, they will traditionally be the one with white hair, some weird color of eyes, and they're very expressionless.
Yes.
And the reason that this trope can be done very well is that it highlights the emotions that they do express.
Right.
Because by basically saying that there's almost no emotions ever shown, then you can read a lot more into what emotions are shown at the times when they actually are shown.
Right. You see this a lot in the stereotypical what's the baka girl?
Oh yeah. Wait. Tsunderes?
Tsundere. You can see the tsunderes when they blush. That's the moment where the emotion broke through the facade. This
Sure.
with a kudere is where you're basically giving. Sorry, you were confused there for a second because I wasn't communicating well.
Oh yeah.
The aspect of having the reason for them being the kudere
Exactly.
actually be
Yep.
a relevant plot specific thing. They're not just like that for no reason.
For the sake of being the coup de rey in the story.
Yes, and I would say that a lot of people would say, well, there's just people like that. And I'm like, yes, but there are characters who are like anything for specific reasons.
Right.
The idea that we have no like modus operandi to actually explain character depth is dumb. You should give character depth to any character you actually put into the story. It's just a point of magnitude. And if you're writing a kudere character as being a part of the main group of characters, you need to give them some kind of plot depth as to why they are like this.
Right.
So,
and also,
even though someone like Mikasa, for instance, is kind of a simple character,
yes.
she does have a very specific reason why she
Right.
is the way she is.
And the great point bringing up Mikasa, because one of the things I would like to say is that a lot of times people go too extreme with tropes. The idea of the tsundere or the kudere or any of the deres, right? It's not inherently bad, but they'll usually be done so over the top that you can't believe it. Even if they have some sort of explanation, it won't be enough. In Mikasa's case, there is an absolutely really good reason why she would be distant and a bit cold. And it is proportional to the amount, to how cold she is, right? If she was just literal robot. Well, okay, yeah. That's another great possible
character.
Yeah, kudere character and explanation for why they're that way.
I know, but no one knows which character you're talking
Yuki
about.
Nagato from Haruhi. That's a favorite of mine. But Todoroki is another great example of a kudere, and he has a great reason for being aloof. But he's not an obvious kudere because he does kind of show emotion,
And he's also complex. He actually has character depth.
Right, yeah, exactly.
What a novel concept. The idea that you can have a trope as a character with depth. I'd say that one of the cheapest ways you can see if the trope exists is you can easily identify all the tropes. And then you go find the ones with no character depth. And those are the ones that the writer basically said, I don't care to actually give them anything.
I need to have this trope.
Yeah.
So
and
focus on the character first, the trope second.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's how they will have personality.
Yeah.
Video games provide a different kind of avenue for storytelling. What games have you played that told good stories? Oh, that's a great question. I gotta say, back when BioWare was BioWare and not owned by EA, they made some fantastic story-driven games. And I don't think anyone's since then, except maybe BioShock or I don't know, a couple others,
but
made stories of such complexity and character depth as BioWare games in particular.
Specifically KOTOR and then the Mass Effect franchise.
Yeah, I feel like Mass Effect gets a little bit of a
bad rep
because of more recent games like the third Mass Effect and the fourth one.
Well, yeah, Mass Effect Andromeda. We just
don't talk about that. But I gotta say, Mass Effect 2, as far as character depth and story complexity and all that, is probably one of the best non-KOTOR story games out there.
It's pretty fantastic.
And one of the things that's actually, I'd say, makes it better than KOTOR's, both KOTOR's, is that Star Wars carries it a lot for people like Jacob and I.
Sure.
If you take out what actually makes it a story, it's a lot of little mini arcs, essentially. They're not really...
Well, yeah, that's what it is for pretty much any story.
No, but Mass Effect in particular has actual depth in the side characters that KOTOR in particular kind of relegates to one or two characters.
Right. The second one was a bit better on that.
The second one was a lot better on that, but also as a story, it wasn't complete until they did their little Telos restoration thing.
Which is amazing, and make sure you play it with that.
You should play it with that. It is on Steam that way, so do that.
Mm-hmm.
You'll thank me. But I would say, yeah, KOTOR 1, KOTOR 2, Mass Effect 2 are probably some of my favorite story-driven games out there.
Same
and I have to give a special shout-out for BioShock, and I won't tell you why, because if you haven't played it, play it. I'm talking about the first one.
Yeah.
By the way. Do that.
All right, so Inez Martin. So for Soul Eater, what are your favorite things about the anime, and what did you not like? Also, favorite character or partnership?
I think my favorite things about the anime in particular was it was a it was a shonen that kept things in I'd say it kept things in a specific direction, and it's the combination of having the power of friendship thing be in there, but not in such a contrived way that it didn't work. And also one of the main aspects of the story being centered around Krona and Mom.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite thing about.
Sure, yeah, and that really ties in with the whole partnership thing, because what made Soul Eater unique to me, and was the idea that it centered not just on characters necessarily, but it centered on character relationships, because there was the whole, Weaponmeister, Soul and Maka, yeah, and Krona and Mom.
Oh, that was oh my gosh.
But yeah, Soul and Maka's favorite character partnership, because anyone who says Krona and Mom is...
Well, the idea that Krona as a character becomes connected to Maka and the rest of them in such a way because of their actions, I think is one of the better examples of power of friendship trope that is out there at all.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually kind of liked the ending.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I would say a lot of people have said that they don't like. I think one of the things that I didn't like about Soul Eater was the fact that they felt the necessary kind of bit to show all this kind of side meandering in sort of the, I would say sort of the middle, and maybe a little bit of the lack of development for the final, what was it, the Kishin?
Because if you think about it, Soul Eater's only 51, 52 episodes. It's not that long. It's
for a shonen, it's not.
For long. A shonen, it's not long.
I think it gets up to about 60, but yeah. Anyways.
Oh, okay. But a lot of that was sort of unnecessary screen time.
Right. It's the idea that most shonen like this tend to have aspects of the story that's focused around character development, but that ends up being kind of an excuse for them to have character depth in moments that aren't really plot relevant. And it's a trade-off that most people are okay with. But I would say that if you've watched Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, you know that you can have everything be plot relevant, except for maybe one episode, and have tons of character development throughout everything for a large cast of characters.
Before we got into MHA and pretty much all the shows that we've been reacting to, we used to describe Soul Eater as it still bows down, not worthy to Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. But other than that, it's just a solid shonen, and
yeah. I would say that it has problems, sure, but as far as shonen go, if you're like us and you can't stand the idea of dragging a story out over 200, 300 episodes, Soul Eater's great for you.
Yeah,
it's great. Peter Haven asks, what do you think about the fact that so many main characters in shonen are related to someone important and or powerful? It's like guess which kind of anime trope are they going to use for the protagonist in shonens nowadays?
It's like, what happened to the underdog?
What happened to it? Why can't they just be an underdog?
And even with someone like Deku, I absolutely love My Hero Academia, and I love how they handled him, getting one for all. But that sort of makes it so it's okay, now you have the magic sword of destiny, and you are now the chosen one,
right,
so
yeah. One of the things that I think makes it identifiable, because it ties into the hero's journey so tightly, is the idea of legacy and inheritance,
right,
and what is passed down from one generation to the other, and that is an integral part of culture. That's not a trope. That's actually the way culture works. There's rites of passage. There's the idea of once the son or the daughter passes moves on into adulthood, they are passed down a boon from those that have gone before them. And having this be a very tight plot point, specifically okay, now you get you're the bloodline of the Silver-Eyed Warriors or something like that. It's a little bit okay, yeah, we've come to expect it now. But if you think about it in terms of writing, or even actually in real history, you will not find very many great people that didn't have someone connected to them that basically passed on the torch.
Yeah.
And then they took the torch and ran with it.
Right. Because you need the mentor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that is a great point, because you when it's always like, oh, the main character is like a prince, or whatever, the chosen one.
Right.
It can take away from the idea that that anyone could be the hero if they chose to be the hero.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Right. It's kind of like Avatar and Avatar The Last Airbender. It's the idea that they chose very geniusly to not have Aang be the sole main character. They had Zuko be a dual main character with him, and that led to, I would say, a different aspect of the burden of destiny being laid upon the main character.
Well, and they also made Katara and Sokka, even though Katara was a waterbender, they weren't anyone important in the Southern Water Tribe. Mm-hmm. They were just, the people that weren't babies.
Jacob, they were the chiefs. They were the chief's kids. So
was he the chief?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So that doesn't really
okay.
work
Well, then scratch that.
Yeah. So let's go on to the next question. Peter Haven still asks, so what do you think about the lack of great female characters in anime? Well, here's actually the thing that I would say to contradict this a little bit, is anime is one of the best places to find great female characters. It's kind of funny, but if I was to watch television, like regular serialized dramas,
anime,
Western U.S. crap TV, there are, like, I would say 2 or 3 times less great female characters.
Yeah. And while a lot of times the female characters in anime are more of like just good female characters, and then the male characters will, generally be better. Mm-hmm.
There is a definite slant towards anime being more well versed in crafting real female characters. And actually, I think that's one of the things that's a good point to make difference here, is the idea that great can have a different connotation, like powerful or strong. And I think one of the main points is that you need to make real female characters, not necessarily great ones, because I don't think great male characters are necessarily even relatable or real.
Yeah. Well, right. There's right. The difference between great characters versus like people that are great.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. One of the funny examples of a show that I don't like, but I love the female characters involved in, is Black Lagoon. Jacob loves this show because as like the dialogue and some of the character interactions are just so good. But if you actually just take the story out and you take these female characters in there, you're like, oh my gosh, Balalaika!
Well, not all
Holy
of them.
Crap.
Not all of them, but yes, Balalaika and Revi are fantastic. Mm-hmm. But one of the, I would say the reasoning behind why there aren't very many just great, like, stand out female characters is because usually the female characters and the attention that they get in anime is done for the standpoint of sex appeal and trying to win that best girl competition.
Yes, I cannot actually emphasize what you're saying more. This is actually why I don't like fan service. It's not actually because I don't like what it is, or I don't like the idea of the best girl competition, because I play the game. Like, I'm already like thinking, I'm like, who's best girl, right?
Yeah.
But I don't like it because it reminds me of the position that female characters are in storytelling.
Right.
And like, you can't really deny this, like, at all. I actually was just watching something recently where some actress was talking about this trope in storytelling, and this is a very common one when a man is involved in kind of the creation of the story. Now, I'm not trying to get like into the whole debate here, but when you see a female character looking at the main male character and go, what are we going to do now?
Yeah.
That kind of bit actually frustrates me more than fan come or the sex appeal part.
Yes, because it takes away the sense of agency. It's like, come on.
Keep going. Sorry.
But the idea is that characters should have their own,
thank you.
Like wants, desires, whys, and modus operandi.
Right.
Like, they should be able to actually act and do stuff on their own. It's novel, but it's like they're a separate human being, so you would think they'd be able to be a regular human being, just like any other human being.
As George R. R. Martin puts, how do you... The interviewer asked him the dumbest question. Like,
Oh my
how
God.
do you write such great, strong female characters? And he's like, well, I always assumed women were people too.
Yeah, exactly.
And the interviewer's just like... yeah, so next question. It's hilariously bad, actually, when you look at the bad parts. I was wanting to make a point of saying, guys, that anime has actually a leg up on a lot of other means of storytelling, especially in specific countries. But, yes, in anime, the minute that female character comes on that's tied specifically to the male character for the purpose of just driving their story, I go, really?
Yeah.
Really?
I was expecting something a little more...
No, I just get, like, disappointed. I don't care what I was expecting. It's just the idea that, like, why are we doing? Like, right. And any time that, a character, male or female, comes in with their own agency and they're their own character and they have their own motivations, they have all this depth and stuff, I get happy. But I try not to get too disappointed by counting. Kind of the idea of, like, well, in this story, we have 12, developed male characters and 2 developed female characters. Seems a little bit odd.
Right.
The way you can actually help affect this change and stuff without going into, like, the dumb debates and stuff online is call out in particular and support the stories that support the good, strong, sense of agency, female characters as much as you can.
Right.
As often as you can.
Yep.
And don't rag necessarily on the ones that are bad, because your voice kind of just gets lost in the hum of the whole thing. I think I did this for a little bit with a couple different things that I was really passionate about. And things just changed over time.
Right.
But yeah, this one I'm kind of passionate about, especially when I get really invested into a show. I might be a little bit too critical sometimes of this. So wow, we went on a while for that one.
We did. All right, so
let's get to the next one.
Anthea Glizmanatad.
What is your favorite character trope and why, and how would you use it more effectively? I don't know. My favorite character trope. There's so many of them. I would say I'm not really going to give a direct answer to this question, but because it's a character trope, I would say a lot of the things that Jacob and I like are the characters that have the kind of the intelligence, witty factor to them.
Oh, sure.
So they're not necessarily a smartass like the Magnificent Bastard, but they're like Crow from Ruby.
Yeah,
it's
just
like
sass.
It's like, well, thank goodness I'm out there risking my life to keep you all informed. It's like the character that is willing to poke fun about the tropes that are around them.
Yeah.
It's almost the meta character who is aware too much of the fact that they're in a story, so they poke at all the tropes around them.
Right.
And I feel like making that effective is just giving there some comedic value to it, so it's not taken seriously, except for when they get into, like, plot, emotion, really relevant, like, big stuff. But I don't really have a straight answer for that one, because go read up on tropes. That's what I would just say, is that go find your own, because I would love to know what your guys' favorite tropes are with characters, because I don't know.
Probably the one that's... I feel like I just have to mention the Kudere, not because it's necessarily my favorite. I tend to get a little bit peeved when I see it, but
that's you're a Kudere.
Well, yes, but also because I feel like it's so often done poorly, and the times that it has been done really well, I love them so much, like it's so good. But so if not that, and I kind of already answered that question previously, but if not that, I would say the Magnificent Bastard. And
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah. So, and tvtropes.net. Read up on it. There's the Magnificent Bastard page, but then there's also How Do I Write a Magnificent Bastard, and it's really good. Make a lot of reference to anime, because anime tries to do that several times.
Quite a bit. Yeah. Next question by Dark Thug, or Dark Thug. What do you think of the mecha genre as a whole? I think it's a little bit out of ideas. Recently, I think also there's been a falling from grace in the idea that people generally nowadays don't like the mecha genre as much.
Right.
I think that might be a little bit of Transformers' fault in the more recent years. But even before that, I think they had problems of running into things where they didn't actually focus things on the characters and they focused too much on the premise.
Right. The idea, and also one other thing I would like to say, that the idea of giant robots, we've become used to that, but that should be impressive. Like, kind of like with magic, that should be something that's like wondrous and like terrifying. So make it more like that.
Make it more like that. Speaking of mecha genre, the next mecha I'm actually going to see, I know I'm not going to watch really any others, probably other than that, is Rooster Teeth's making a mecha.
Oh, that's right.
And I have a firm belief that they're going to make a character-driven mecha.
Yeah.
So make more character-driven mechas, I'd say.
We don't have a whole lot of exposure with the traditional mecha genre as a whole, though.
Like,
I Tokios, Gurren Lagann, and like...
Right, but I actually might have more than Jacob, because I've had friends that have tried to push on me their old nostalgic mecha stuff, and it's pretty bad. And that's maybe one of the problems of it, is they're so ambitious for their time that they don't age well, because their visuals and things like that just don't work. But also, even those didn't really seem to be as character focused. Robin Groenewegen. Sorry, we butchered the name, but Robin, your question is fantastic. What anime made you cry the most or brought out the most emotions, and would you recommend to someone? There were some other people that asked basically the same question, so we're getting to this one from yours in particular.
Do you want to go first?
I don't know.
All right,
I'll
just go. All right, so I'm going to mention 3 actually. Wolf Children, Toradora, Silent Voice.
Yeah.
So I already talked about A Silent Voice and how amazing that is and why it's so amazing and all that. Wolf Children, it's the similar kind of thing where there's something very relatable, because it's either the mom or just growing up and deciding what you want to be. So everyone either had a mom or had to grow up at some point. And then Toradora, because it's amazing, and Lost My Pieces is amazing, and
the problem with answering this question is that I usually end up answering whatever I just watched recently that had the most impact and emotions and stuff, because I can't rewatch those things frequently. So I don't rewatch generally things that make me cry that much. But A Silent Voice was huge. I mentioned it on Twitter a while ago. I cried buckets full. Like, I was thirsty after the movie because I think I cried so much. It was pretty emotional. And it was a very heavy emotional film. So it brought out a lot of different types of complex emotions from me. Susaya asks, as writers, do you think it is best to plan every detail and know every character in a story before starting to write, or just a vague idea is enough? Yes and yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's both. It's the idea that a great story can start with a picture, and sometimes you will not write until you have everything outlined. I will say that depending on what style of writer you are, that's what's right for you. I need an outline. I need to outline. I need to. But the fun thing is I actually like outlining. So it actually helps me. I enjoy putting all those little details in and peppering them throughout and then connecting it all with the story. So I don't consider the outline the story. So I sometimes will do a lot of things where I'll do this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. That's my outline. Then I'll break those down into their individual components, and then I'll write story.
I would say
I
would say it's best to at least have some idea of where you want it to go and how you want it to end, because the biggest travesty I see, and that I did see usually in Western television and stuff, is the show that was really good. It had that great first season, so they try and keep it going because they want to milk this cash cow for all it's gotten more, and then it ends up just being terrible.
Right.
Because they don't have a clear picture of where it's going to go and how it's going to end. And also, just speaking from like my experience with writing, if you plan out your story and really plan it out and like get very particular with the details, you will save yourself so much time. When I went from writing the first draft to the second draft, it was basically a complete rewrite.
Yeah.
Because I just had like some fundamental things that had to be changed. So I had to rewrite the whole story.
I would say also there's a thing that's interesting when you think of writing, and that you become very critical of your own work, And if you are actually thinking of just finishing a story, it doesn't matter which of these you do. It doesn't. True. It's the idea that will you keep writing which from either one of these. If one of these will get you to a point where you have to stop,
then don't do it.
Then don't do that one.
Yeah.
Do the other one. Because one of these, I think, will bring you to the end of your point, and then you will have to switch to the other kind of style and get some details out, or get your next vision. You know, I see colors, that kind of thing. So for me in particular, I think the story inception starts off with a vague idea, and then I go into outlining.
Yeah.
So I do not start out with the details and then go and look for vision again. I need the vision first.
Right.
So maybe some contemplation is good to have before every writing session. And you think about, all right, what do I want to communicate here next? Okay, I want to communicate this emotion and this thing. Okay, now I'll go into my details and see where I'm going to emphasize those things in particular. And there you go.
I heard that if you've heard of the anime film Your Name, I sincerely suggest checking it out. It's amazing. It was done by Makoto Shinkai. And one of the things that I heard he did is he actually did an outline for the whole story, not just for the story and what would happen in the plot, but how that would affect the audience emotionally.
Wow.
And it was very effective.
It was.
He went in depth onto the planning, and it worked. So there is a huge realm of bounties that you can reap if you do the proper planning. I know you may want to just do the whole artsy thing of like, I'm just going to discover where the story takes me, but having at least some planning in there is a really good idea.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much for sticking around to this the episode here. If you want to get more interaction with us for questions and stuff, check out our Patreon in the description below.
Yep.
We have early access options. We have a Discord in particular, which is probably the best place to go for more questions and stuff like this. But yeah, thank you so much for submitting these questions. If you want to have your questions answered in a future podcast, leave them in the comments below. We are very much looking at all of them.
Yes.
And unless it's something that we've answered maybe like 5 or 6 times, you'll probably get your question answered. So yeah, we'll see you all later. But until then, we're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we'll see you all next time.